Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Rosario plus vampire and got married to Inner Moka, Outer Moka, and Kurumu? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox in the Monster's Den. The world returned in a lurch, the rumble of an engine vibrating through the worn velvet of a bus seat and into Naruto's bones. He blinked, the light outside a smear of emerald and gray. Trees like watercolor paintings rushing past a dusty window. A name echoed in the hollows of his mind, Naruto Uzumaki. It felt right, a comfortable weight in the center of his chest. Beyond that, there was nothing, a void, vast and silent, where memories should have been. He didn't know how he got on this bus, where it was going, or where he had come from. Yet, panic as a distant shore he couldn't quite reach. Instead, a strange calm settled over him, an instinct honed in a life he couldn't recall, whispering that panic was a luxury. He rolled his shoulders, the muscles coiling with a familiar ease. His body felt like a well-oiled machine, thrumming with a latent energy that prickled just beneath his skin. A glance at his reflection in the window showed a young G-man with a sun-kissed mop of blonde hair, eyes the color of a clear summer sky, and 3 faint whisker-like marks on each cheek. The face was his, he knew, but the story behind it was a blank page. The bus wheezed to a halt before a desolate, skeletal tree and a sign that read, Yokai Academy. The name sent another ripple through him, not of memory, but of feeling. A low, primal hum of warning that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The few other students shuffling off the bus did little to soothe the feeling. They looked off. Their smiles were a little too wide, their eyes held a glint of something predatory. One of them, a boy with a mop of brown hair and an air of profound ordinariness, stumbled near him, dropping a book. Naruto instinctively bent, scooping it up before it hit the dirt. "Thanks," the boy said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm Sukune Aono. It's my first day." "Naruto Uzumaki," he replied, his own voice steady, offering a small, reassuring smile. The name felt solid on his tongue. It was his anchor in this sea of uncertainty. As they walked toward the imposing, Gothic school building, a blur of pink shot past them, the scent of cherry blossoms trailing in its wake. A girl with vibrant pink hair and startlingly green eyes collided with Sukune, sending them both tumbling to the ground. She was on her feet in an instant, bowing in apology, a silver rosa. Rai with a heavy cross glinting at her throat. "I'm so sorry," she chirped, her voice as bright and sweet as her appearance. "My name is Moka Akashiya." Naruto watched the exchange, his senses on high alert. The girl, Moka, was beautiful, almost unnervingly so, but beneath the sweet scent of cherry blossoms, there was another, fainter smell. The coppery, metallic tang of blood. A flicker of movement. Chi drew his eye to a hulking figure leaning against a tree nearby. The student, whose name he would later learn was Saizo Komiya, had a brutish face twisted into a sneer. His gaze wasn't on Moka's face, but on the delicate line of her neck. A hungry, predatory glint in his eyes. Naruto's internal alarms, the ones that had been humming quietly since he awoke, now blared to life. The day was a blur of introductions and orientation. The school's strangeness a constant, low-grade pressure. The teachers spoke of coexistence and harmony, but the students watched each other like wolves in a pen. Naruto moved through it all with a placid expression, but inside, his instincts were cataloging every detail. The way a student's eyes glowed faintly in the shadows, the unnatural speed of another, the subtle, inhuman contours of their forms. He didn't know what they were, but he knew they weren't human. And, a deeper, more unsettling part of him realized, neither was he. The energy coiling in his gut, a vast, swirling sea of power he could feel but not name, was proof of that. The inevitable confrontation came sooner than he expected. He found Sukune cornered by Saizo and his cronies behind the old school building. Saizo's grin was a slash of yellowed teeth. "You smell delicious," Saizo rasped, his eyes fixed on Sukune, who was pale with terror. "Just a little taste. No one will know." Naruto didn't announce his presence. He didn't need to. He simply moved. One moment he was 20 feet away, the next he was standing between Saizo and Sukune. He didn't run. It felt more like he had simply arrived. Saizo recoiled, startled. "Who the hell are you?" "Leave him alone," Naruto said. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge that cut through the air. Saizo laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Or what, pretty boy? You'll stop me." He lunged, his hand transforming, claws extending from his fingertips. He was fast, faster than any human had a right to be. But to Naruto, it was like watching a snail try to outrun a hawk. He sidestepped the clumsy swipe, his hand shooting out and gripping Saizo's wrist. The effect was instantaneous. Saizo's eyes widened in shock, a pained grunt escaping his lips. Naruto's grip was like a steel vice. With a fluid, economical twist, he spun Saizo around, using his own momentum against him, and slammed him face first into the brick wall. The sound was a sickening crunch. Saizo's friends, who had been laughing moments before, were now frozen, their faces masks of disbelief. "I said," Naruto repeated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "leave him alone." He released his grip, and Saizo slumped to the ground, groaning. A flicker of something hot and golden flared in Naruto's eyes, an untamed, ancient power that made the air crackle. The other bullies scrambled backward. Their predatory confidence shattered, and fled. Naruto turned to Sukune, his expression softening. "You okay?" Before Sukune could answer, Moka came running around the corner. Her face etched with worry. "Sukune," I heard shouting. Her eyes fell on the groaning Saizo, then to Naruto. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep, profound concern. But Saizo wasn't finished. With a roar of fury, he surged to his feet, his features twisting, becoming more bestial. "You'll pay for that. I'm a yokai, a monster." He charged, not at Naruto, but at Moka. It was a cowardly, spiteful act. He was still too fast for Sukune to react, a blur of motion. But again, for Naruto, time seemed to stretch. He saw Saizo's trajectory, saw the fear in Moka's eyes, saw the silver rosary at her throat. He moved to intercept, but in his lunge, his outstretched hand snagged on the cross. The chain snapped. The rosary flew through the air, clattering against the pavement. And then, everything changed. The air grew heavy, thick with an oppressive, suffocating power. Moka's sweet, cherry blossom scent was consumed by the intoxicating aroma of night-blooming jasmine and fresh blood. Her pink hair seemed to drain of color, shifting to a brilliant, spectral silver. Her eyes, once a gentle green, now blazed with a crimson light that promised nothing but death. Her entire demeanor shifted, from a frightened girl to a being of supreme, arrogant power. A queen surveying her domain. This was not Moka. This was something else entirely. "Know your place, you worthless scum," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr that was infinitely more terrifying than Saizo's roar. Saizo, who had been charging with murderous intent, skidded to a halt, his face a mask of pure, abject terror. An S-class monster, a vampire. He stammered. The silver-haired Moka didn't even glance at him. Her blood-red eyes were fixed on Naruto. He met her gaze without flinching. He could feel the immense, crushing aura she projected. An aura that screamed of ancient power and casual lethality. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt familiar. Like meeting a kindred spirit in a world of sheep. "You," she said, her voice laced with a dangerous curiosity. "You are not human. What are you?" Naruto didn't have an answer. "I don't know," he admitted, and it was the honest truth. A flicker of surprise, then amusement, crossed her features. Before she could press further, Saizo, driven by either stupidity or desperation, let out another roar and charged her. She sighed, a sound of profound boredom. Without turning, she delivered a single, devastatingly elegant kick. Her leg was a blur, connecting with Saizo's chest with a sound like a thunderclap. He was launched backward, crashing through the brick wall as if it were made of paper, and disappeared from sight. She turned back to Naruto, her crimson eyes appraising him, a slow, predatory smile gracing her lips. "You have a power I have never encountered. And you did not cower. I find that interesting." From the shadows of a nearby tree line, a girl with stunning blue hair and a figure that defied gravity watched the entire scene unfold. Kurumu Kurono, a succubus of considerable power and ambition, had initially dismissed Naruto as just another piece of scenery. Now, her eyes were wide with fascination. She had felt the flare of his strange, golden energy. She had seen him move with a speed and precision that rivaled some of the most powerful monsters in the academy. And now, he stood before the legendary inner Moka, the school's most feared and respected S-class monster, and he wasn't even trembling. He was meeting her gaze, power for power. Kurumu's succubus instincts, which had been fixated on ensnaring the most powerful male she could find to ensure her lineage, went into overdrive. This boy, this Naruto, was something new. Something far more valuable than any of the brutish, simple-minded monsters who postured and preened around the school. He was a mystery, a font of unknown power wrapped in an enigma. He was the ultimate prize. Inner Moka took a step toward Naruto, the sheer force of her presence making the air shimmer. "Tell me your name." "Naruto Uzumaki," he replied, his stance unchanged, his body relaxed but ready. "Naruto Uzumaki," she repeated, tasting the name. "I will remember it." She then bent down, her movements fluid and graceful, and picked up the fallen rosary. For a moment, she just looked at it, then back at Naruto. With a sigh that sounded almost reluctant, she fastened it around her neck. The transformation was immediate. The oppressive aura vanished. Her hair bled from silver back to pink, her eyes from crimson to green. The powerful, arrogant queen was gone, replaced once more by the sweet, slightly flustered Moka Akashiya. She blinked, looking around in confusion. What happened? Saizo was. Naruto just offered her a small smile. "It's handled." Moka looked at Naruto, then at the massive, monster-shaped hole in the brick wall, then back at Naruto. A deep blush spread across her cheeks. "Oh, I see." The school bell rang, its shrill cry shattering the tense silence. Students began to trickle out of the main building, their chatter filling the air. But as they caught sight of the scene, the hole in the wall, the dazed Sukune, and Naruto and Moka standing in the middle of it all, a hush fell. Whispers erupted, eyes, filled with a mixture of fear, awe, and speculation, all focused on the blonde with the strange whisker marks. Naruto Uzumaki had been at Yokai Academy for less than a day. And he had already shattered its fragile peace. He had awakened its most powerful monster, displayed a power no one could identify, and earned the unwanted attendee on of every single student and faculty member. He stood there, a man without a past, surrounded by monsters, with more questions than answers. And for the first time since he woke up on that bus, he felt a genuine, thrilling spark of excitement. Whatever this place was, whatever he was, his life was about to get interesting. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes and Instincts. The aftermath of Saizo's demolition was a strange, charged silence. As the bell's echo died, the courtyard filled with students whose chatter had frozen on their lips. They stared at the monster-shaped hole in the wall, at the dazed and trembling Sukune. And finally, at Naruto. He stood in the eye of the hurricane, a calm center while the storm of whispers and pointed fingers swirled around him. Moka was beside him, her cheeks still flushed from her transformation, her green eyes darting nervously from Naruto to the gawking crowd. Fear was a scent, Naruto realized. A sharp, musky odor that now clung to the air, thicker than the autumn chill. Every student gave them a wide berth, their eyes a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. He wasn't just a new student anymore. He was an event. A disruption to the careful, balanced predatory ecosystem of Yokai Academy. He felt their gazes like physical things, some sharp with challenge, others slick with fear, a few analytical and cold. It was the last group that put him on edge. They weren't just reacting, they were assessing. "We should probably go," Moka whispered, her hand instinctively tugging at the sleeve of his uniform blazer. The simple touch sent a jolt through him. A warmth that had nothing to do with the monstrous power he'd felt from her moments ago. He nodded, his eyes briefly scanning the crowd, committing faces to a memory he hoped would start sticking. He offered Sukune a hand, pulling the still shaken boy to his feet. "You good?" I think so," Sukune stammered, his gaze flicking toward the hole in the wall. What was that?" "What is she?" "She's Moka," Naruto said simply, as if that explained everything. He didn't have the answers Sukune was looking for, because he didn't have them for himself. All he had was instinct, and his instinct told him to get Moka and Sukune away from these prying eyes. As they walked away, the whispers followed them like a pack of hounds. Did you see that kick? Who's the blonde guy? He didn't even flinch. He broke the seal. He's got to be S-class too. The words meant little to him, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Later, sitting on a bench overlooking the school's unnaturally crimson-tinged lake, Moka tried to explain. She fiddled with the silver cross at her throat, the rosary a heavy, tangible symbol of her fractured existence. The Moka you saw, that's my true self, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The inner Moka. This rosary seals her power, and her personality. It's for my own protection, and everyone else's. She looked up at him, her green eyes filled with a vulnerable curiosity. You weren't afraid of her. It wasn't a question, but a statement of disbelief. Naruto leaned back, staring at the strange, blood-red water. She felt familiar. He couldn't explain it any better than that. The crushing aura, the absolute confidence, the scent of blood and power, it didn't trigger fear in him. It resonated with something deep inside, a sleeping giant in his own soul. It was like listening to a song I'd forgotten the words to. Moka tilted her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. She's not a song. She's a weapon. My mother gave me this rosary so I could live a peaceful life, so I could try to make friends with humans, before I knew I'd be sent to a school full of monsters. He felt a pang of something. An echo of a forgotten emotion. Loneliness. He understood, in a fundamental way he couldn't articulate, what it felt like to be set apart, to carry a power that made others fear you. Well, he said, turning to her with a disarming grin that felt surprisingly natural on his face. You've made 2 friends today. He gestured from himself to Sukune, who was still trying to process the fact that his new friends were a vampire and, whatever Naruto was. Moka's blush returned, deeper this time. Naruto, she began, but was cut off by a new voice, one as smooth and sweet as honey laced with poison. Well, what do we have here? The 2 celebrities of the hour. A girl with a cascade of brilliant blue hair and a figure that seemed to defy both gravity and the school's dress code sauntered toward them. Her every movement was a calculated study in seduction, her hips swaying with a hypnotic rhythm. It was the girl from the tree line. Kurumu Kurono. Her eyes, a captivating shade of violet, were locked on Naruto, ignoring Moka and Sukune completely. I saw what you did back there, she purred, stopping a mere breath away from him. The air around her shimmered with a faint, pinkish energy that tickled his senses. It felt cloying, invasive. To stand up to Saizo, and then to face down Akashia's other self, you must be incredibly powerful. I can handle myself, Naruto said, his tone neutral. He didn't shift away, but he didn't lean in either, creating an unbreachable space between them. Kurumu's smile widened. She wasn't used to being met with such indifference. It was intoxicating. Oh, I'm sure you can. A man like you deserves the best. The most beautiful, most powerful woman in the academy. Her hand came up, a single, perfectly manicured finger tracing a line on his chest. You don't want to waste your time with a pale, flat imitation like her. She flicked her eyes toward Moka, the insult delivered with a saccharine smile. Moka flinched as if struck. Hey, that's not nice. Naruto's hand shot up, catching Kurumu's wrist before her finger could travel any higher. His grip was gentle, but absolute. The pinkish, cloying energy around her flickered and died, as if snuffed out by a sudden gale. That's enough, he said, his blue eyes losing their warmth, becoming as hard and cold as glacial ice. Apologize to her. Kurumu's jaw dropped. She stared at him, then at his hand on her wrist. No one had ever resisted her succubus charm so effortlessly. No one had ever dared to command her. The shock quickly morphed into a furious, indignant rage. Let go of me, she snarled, her voice losing its honeyed edge. Not until you apologize, Naruto said, his voice unwavering. The immense, dormant energy within him swirled, not with anger, but with a cold, absolute certainty. It was a pressure he exerted without conscious thought, the force of a will forged in 1,000 forgotten battles. For a moment, they were locked in a stalemate. Kurumu's violet eyes blazed with fury, while Naruto's were a calm, unyielding blue. He could feel her trying to push her power back at him, that strange, invasive energy that sought to fog the mind and sway the heart. It was like a gentle mist trying to erode a mountain. It had no effect. Finally, with a frustrated scream, she ripped her wrist from his grasp. "Fine, I'm sorry," she spat in Moka's direction, the words dripping with insincerity. She turned her glare back to Naruto, her facade of seduction completely gone, replaced by raw, monstrous pride. "You've made a big mistake. You have no idea who I am. I know you're someone who was rude to my friend," Naruto replied, his tone making it clear that was all that mattered. With a final, venomous look, Kurumu spun on her heel and stormed away. The sway of her hips now more angry than seductive. "Thank you, Naruto," Moka said softly, looking at him with an expression of pure adoration. "No problem," he said, the easy grin returning. But inside, he was analyzing. A succubus. The name came to him unbidden, a fragment of lost knowledge. A monster that fed on charm and life force. He had felt her power, felt its nature, and his own instinct. TS had met it and crushed it without a second thought. It was another piece of the puzzle of himself. He didn't know who he was, but he was beginning to understand what he was. He was a protector, and he was powerful. From the window of a high clock tower, a man with nondescript features and round glasses watched the scene by the lake through a pair of binoculars. Mr. Kageyama, the literature teacher, lowered the lenses, a thoughtful, calculating expression on his face. He'd seen the confrontation. He'd felt the subtle, yet overwhelming, surge of the boy's will. It wasn't the wild, chaotic energy of a typical yokai. It was controlled, contained, a deep, silent ocean beneath a deceptively calm surface. He pulled a small, enchanted scroll from his pocket, unrolling it. A single, glowing symbol pulsed in its center. He pressed his thumb to it, and a voice, cold and disembodied, echoed directly in his mind. Less than report, greater than. The anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki, has made contact with the vampire, Akashiya, and has now drawn the attention of the succubus, Kurono, Kageyama murmured under his breath, his voice flat and academic. His power is unusual. He effortlessly neutralized the succubus's charm ability with what appeared to be sheer willpower. There are no signs of demonic energy, vampiric aura, or lycanthropic traces. He is an unknown. There was a pause. The voice on the other end felt ancient, powerful. Less than continue observation. Do not engage. The Council of Anti-Deities wishes to see the full extent of this vessel's capabilities before we intervene. We cannot afford another incident like the last one. Greater than. Understood, Kageyama whispered. The scroll rolled itself up, the glowing symbol fading. He cast one last look at the blonde boy, now laughing with the vampire girl. A vessel. That's what the council called him. A container for a power they feared, a power they had fought and bled to seal away centuries ago. And it seemed this vessel was far stronger, and far more sentient, than they had ever anticipated. The challenge Naruto had issued to Kurumu did not go unanswered. 2 days later, he found a formal letter of challenge in his locker. Not for a fight, but for a contest of affection. To be held in the school's main courtyard. The winner would claim Naruto as their prize. It was ridiculous, theatrical, and utterly insane. Kurumu, it seemed, was not one to accept defeat gracefully. When he arrived, a crowd had already gathered. Kurumu stood in the center, dressed in a stunning idol-like outfit, playing to the audience. Moka stood to the side, looking anxious and worried. Naruto, Kurumu called out, her voice amplified by some unseen magic. You're here, ready to accept the love of a true S-class beauty. Naruto just sighed, running a hand through his blonde hair. Kurumu, I already told you. I'm not interested. Actions speak louder than words, she declared. With a dramatic flourish, she leapt into the air. Her back arched, and with a sound like tearing silk, too large. Leathery bat-like wings erupted from her shoulder blades. Her nails elongated into wicked-looking claws, and her violet eyes glowed with an inner light. I will show you the power of a succubus. I will make you mine. She dove at him, a blur of blue and black. She was fast, her claws aimed at his throat. The crowd gasped. Moka cried out his name. Naruto didn't move from his spot. He simply tilted his head to the side. Kurumu's claws missing him by a millimeter. As she shot past, he pivoted on his heel, his hand snapping out and latching onto her ankle. He used her own momentum, swinging her in a wide, controlled arc before slamming her into the hard-packed earth of the courtyard. Crack! The ground fractured beneath her. Kurumu cried out, more from shock than pain. She hadn't even seen him move. He was supposed to be a brawler, strong but unrefined. This was different. This was the precise, effortless grace of a master martial artist. She scrambled back, putting distance between them. A genuine flicker of fear in her eyes. "How? You're too slow," Naruto said, his voice calm, almost instructional. "You broadcast your every move. You rely on your power, but you have no skill." The words were a deeper blow than the slam to the ground. Her pride, her very identity as a powerful succubus, was being systematically dismantled. With a scream of pure fury, she launched herself at him again. This time leading with a powerful kick aimed at his head. He didn't even bother to dodge. He simply raised an arm, catching her leg against his forearm. The impact was immense, a shockwave rippling through the air. Yet he didn't so much as slide back an inch. He was an immovable object. He held her there, her leg trapped in his grip, her body suspended awkwardly in the air. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious. That was the final straw. Humiliated, enraged, and desperate, Kurumu made a final, foolish move. She twisted, using her free leg to kick off his chest. Propelling herself toward the one person she knew was his weakness, Moka. "If I can't have you, no one can," she shrieked, her claws aimed directly at Moka's heart. It was a fatal miscalculation. She had assumed Naruto's speed had a limit. She was wrong. He moved. He didn't run. He didn't leap. He simply vanished. One instant he was holding her leg, the next he was a golden blur that intercepted her path. In his haste to protect Moka, his hand brushed against her chest, his fingers snagging the rosary. The world seemed to hold its breath. The cross clattered to the ground. The oppressive, intoxicating wave of power washed over the courtyard, 1,000 times more potent than it had been in the alley. The air crackled with raw, untamed energy. Moka's hair flashed from pink to a brilliant, shining silver. Her eyes burning like twin crimson stars. The queen had returned to her throne. Inner Moka stood between a stunned Naruto and a terrified Kurumu, her gaze holding the cold, detached fury of a goddess. She took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. Naruto's protective stance, Kurumu's attack form, the fear on the faces of the crowd. "You dare," she said, her voice a silken whisper that carried across the entire courtyard, "to threaten what is mine." Kurumu froze mid-air, her momentum stolen by sheer terror. She hung there, suspended by the vampire's will, her face a mask of primal fear. Inner Moka didn't look at her. Her crimson eyes were locked on Naruto. The corner of her perfect mouth tilted up in a smirk that was both dangerous and amused. "Twice in 1 week, you've called me out. You were either very brave, or very foolish." She took a step toward him, the crowd instinctively recoiling. "Which one is it, Naruto Uzumaki?" He met her gaze, the strange sense of resonance returning, stronger this time. He felt the vast power coiled within her, a perfect mirror to the one slumbering in his own gut. He wasn't afraid. He was intrigued. He was, for the first time in his new life, face to face with an equal. "Maybe a little of both," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Her smirk widened. She turned her head slightly, her gaze finally falling upon the trembling succubus. "As for you," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "know your place." With a flick of her wrist, an invisible force slammed into Kurumu, sending her tumbling through the air like a discarded doll. She crashed into the clock tower, the ancient stone groaning under the impact, before slumping to the ground, defeated and broken, not just in body, but in spirit. Inner Moka turned back to Naruto. Her expression unreadable. She walked toward him, picked up the rosary from the ground, and paused, her crimson eyes searching his blue ones. She saw no fear, no subservience. Only a calm, steady curiosity that matched her own. For a long, silent moment, the world watched as the two most powerful and mysterious beings in Yokai Academy stood face to face. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost disappointed, she refastened the seal. The silver hair bled back to pink, the crimson eyes softened to green. Outer Moka stumbled, caught by Naruto, her mind a whirl of confusion. What happened? She stammered, looking at the unconscious Kurumu, then at Naruto's steadying arms. Naruto looked over her head at the rest of the student body. Their expressions were no longer just fearful. They were reverent, terrified. In a single afternoon, he had humbled a succubus and stood on equal footing with a vampire lord. He still didn't know who he was or where he came from. But today, he had given everyone else an answer. He was the one person at Yokai Academy that you did not, under any circumstances, mess with. From his window, Mr. Kageyama lowered his binoculars, his hand trembling slightly. The vessel is stronger than anticipated, he whispered into the silence of his room. He is not just a container. He is in control. The council must be informed. Immediately. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Rules of the Hunt. The day after Kurumu's defeat, the air in Yokai Academy was different. The fear that had followed Naruto was now tinged with something else, a deep, profound awe. He was no longer just a powerful anomaly, he was a force of nature that had twice called forth the school's deadliest student and walked away unscathed. He, Moka, and a perpetually nervous Suk-un moved through the crowded hallways in a bubble of silence. Students didn't just give them a wide berth, they parted before them like the Red Sea, heads bowed, eyes averted. I don't think I'll ever get used to this, Sukune muttered. Trying to make himself as small as possible. You get used to it, Moka replied softly, though she herself seemed uncomfortable with the attention. She kept glancing at Naruto, a silent question in her eyes. He, however, seemed completely unaffected. He walked with a relaxed, easy stride, his senses alert but his demeanor calm. The whispers and stares slid off him like water off a duck's back. To him, this wasn't about reputation or fear. It was about peace. And for the moment, it was peaceful. Kurumu was absent from class, the seat that had always been a hub of male attention sitting conspicuously empty. The general assumption was that she had either been expelled or had fled the school in shame. Both assumptions were wrong. They found her waiting them at their usual lunch spot by the lake. She wasn't dressed in her usual seductive attire. Instead, she wore a simple, modest school uniform, her vibrant blue hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She stood stiffly, her hands clenched at her sides. As they approached, she performed a perfect, 90-degree bow, her forehead nearly touching her knees. Naruto-sama, she declared, her voice ringing with a formal, practiced fervor that was completely at odds with her personality. Please allow me to pledge my eternal service to you. I was a fool to challenge you with my meager power. From this day forward, I, Kurumu Kurono, live only to serve your needs. Naruto blinked. Moka gasped. Sukune looked like he was about to faint. Sama, Naruto said, scratching the back of his head. You don't have to do that. Just stand up. I cannot, she insisted, remaining bowed. I have been shown the error of my ways. A succubus's duty is to find the strongest mate to ensure a powerful lineage. My previous methods of seduction were crude and unworthy of a true alpha like yourself. Therefore, I will prove my worth through devotion and servitude. Command me. Shall I fetch your lunch? Massage your shoulders. Eliminate your enemies. She was a whirlwind of dramatic, misguided loyalty. It was, Naruto realized, her own prideful way of processing her utter defeat. She couldn't accept being a simple rival who lost. So she had reframed the entire dynamic. He wasn't her opponent, he was her master. It was absurd, but he could see the desperate sincerity in her violet eyes when she finally straightened up. Look, Kurumu, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I don't want a servant. But I wouldn't mind having another friend. He offered a small, genuine smile. The word, friend, seemed to short-circuit her brain. Her eyes widened, and a slow, creeping blush spread across her cheeks. Friend, she repeated, the word foreign on her tongue. Yeah, friends have each other's backs, Naruto said. That's more valuable than any servant. Moka, seeing the sincerity in his offer, nodded in agreement. He's right, Kurumu. We could all be friends. Kurumu looked from Naruto's steady gaze to Moka's hopeful smile. The conflict in her was palpable. Her instincts screamed at her to submit, to serve the power that had so completely dominated her. But her heart, for the first time, was being offered something different. Acceptance. With a huff that was more her old self, she tossed her ponytail over her shoulder. Fine, she sniffed, trying to reclaim a shred of her dignity. Quote, but don't think this means I've given up. I'll just prove my worth as a friend, so completely that you'll have no choice but to choose me in the end. It was a start. The four of them sat down, the dynamic irrevocably shifted. Kurumu's attempts at serving were clumsy and hilarious, trying to feed Naruto her lunch, fanning him with a large leaf, but beneath the comedy, a fragile truce was forming. Moka was wary but kind. Sukune was terrified but intrigued, and Naruto handled the whole situation with an amused patience that only seemed to fascinate Kurumu more. Their strange, fledgling peace was shattered by the arrival of 5 figures who moved with the unnerving synchronicity of a wolf pack. They wore stark white uniforms that stood out against the school's darker palette, and their faces were cold, impassive masks. The student body, which had been slowly returning to its normal chatter, fell silent once more. The air grew heavy, not with the raw power of a vampire, but with the chilling weight of absolute authority. Leading them was a young man with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair the color of fox fur. An aura of smug superiority and burning conviction radiated from him. Naruto didn't need to be told who they were. He could feel it. The leader's energy signature was a tight, controlled burn, like a banked furnace. The others were lesser flames, but they all burned with the same yokai energy. Foxes. Naruto Uzumaki, the leader said, his voice smooth and condescending. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over their group with disdain. I am Kuyo, chairman of the disciplinary committee. You have become a significant problem. Naruto took a slow bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully before answering. He didn't stand. He didn't show deference. Only a PR. Oblum for people who like to cause trouble, he said calmly. Kuyo's eyes narrowed. You have twice engaged in open combat on school grounds. You have twice forced the release of an S-class monster's sealed form. You have broken the most fundamental rule of Yokai Academy. A monster must never reveal its true nature to others. Your very presence promotes chaos. The first time, I was stopping a bully, Naruto countered, his voice even. The second time, I was defending myself and my friend. The rules didn't seem to be helping much then. The rules are paramount, Kuyo snapped, his composure cracking for a second. They are what allow us to exist, to hide from the human world that would hunt us down and exterminate us. We maintain order by suppressing our instincts, by blending in. You, with your open displays of power, threatened to tear all of that down. Here it was, not a simple grudge, but a battle of philosophies. Kuyo believed in survival through suppression. Naruto, though he couldn't remember why he believed it, knew that true strength came from control, not denial. Hiding and living are two different things, Naruto said, finally standing up. He was a few inches taller than Kuyo, and the simple change in elevation shifted the balance of power. What's the point of surviving if you have to pretend to be something you're not, even in a place that's supposed to be a sanctuary? Kuyo sneered. Idealistic nonsense. You will learn the meaning of order. He snapped his fingers. Seize him. The 4 committee members behind him moved as one. Naruto met their charge. He didn't counter with overwhelming force. He moved with them, a leaf in a stream, redirecting their momentum, turning them against each other. A deflected punch sent one member stumbling into the path of another. A simple leg sweep took down a third. It was over in 5 seconds. 4 of the most elite students in the school were on the ground, groaning, and Naruto hadn't thrown a single punch. He had dismantled their attack with flawless, effortless precision. Kuyo's face was a mask of disbelief, quickly replaced by cold fury. So, you do have some skill beyond brute force. It doesn't matter. He thrust his hand forward, and a ball of brilliant orange fire erupted in his palm. I am a kitsune, a fire yokai of the highest order. I will incinerate your defiance. He launched the fireball. It wasn't a simple projectile. It was a living, homing mass of demonic flame. Moka screamed. Kurumu instinctively raised her arms to shield herself. Naruto stood his ground. As the fireball approached, he raised one hand, his palm open. A strange, swirling distortion appeared in the air before him, a vortex of wind that wasn't there a second ago. The fire flowed into it, not with a violent impact, but as if being drawn into a vacuum. The swirling wind compressed, and Naruto's fingers closed around it, snuffing it out like a candle flame. He opened his hand. Not even a wisp of smoke remained. The entire courtyard was silent. Kuyo stared, his jaw hanging open. He had just witnessed the impossible. His yokai fire, a power that could melt steel, had been absorbed. Vanished. My turn, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. He took a step forward, and Kuyo, for the first time, felt a prickle of genuine fear. This wasn't just a powerful student. This was something else. This was a monster of a different caliber entirely. In a desperate act, Kuyo drew upon all his power, his body igniting in a column of swirling flame. I am the enforcer of this academy's laws. He roared, the fire coalescing into the shape of a giant spectral fox behind him. You will be judged. The flaming fox lunged, its maw gaping wide, ready to consume everything in its path. It wasn't aimed just at Naruto anymore. Its arc would encompass Moka and Sukune. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He didn't have time for a prolonged fight. He needed to end this, now. With a motion too quick to follow, he reached over to Moka. His fingers closing around the silver cross. Sorry, he whispered. I need to borrow your other half. He pulled. The rosary came free. The world seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. The oppressive, soul-crushing wave of power that was Inner Moka's signature washed over the school, and Kuyo's raging inferno sputtered as if hit by a tidal wave. Silver hair fanned out like a royal cape. Crimson eyes snapped open, burning with cold, ancient light. Inner Moka took in the scene. The giant fox of fire, the terrified students, Naruto standing before her, the rosary in his hand. Her crimson eyes met Kuyo's. The smug, righteous Kitsune felt his blood run cold. He was a powerful yokai, an A- class monster by any standard. But he was looking at a creature that was to him as he was to a human. An S-class, pure-blood vampire. A legend. A walking calamity. A fox, she said, her voice a low, melodic hum that vibrated in Kuyo's very bones. Playing with fire. How quaint. The flaming fox, driven by Kuyo's rage, continued its attack. Inner Moka simply raised a hand. Disappear. She didn't move. She didn't launch an attack. She just spoke the word, and the very air around the flaming construct solidified, crushed, and imploded. The massive fox of demonic fire vanished in an instant, leaving behind nothing but a faint shimmer in the air. Kuyo stumbled backward, the backlash of his dispersed power sending him to his knees, gasping. His disciplinary committee members stared, paralyzed by a fear so profound it was almost religious. Inner Moka took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze never leaving the kneeling Kitsune. You are the chairman of the disciplinary committee, she stated, a hint of amusement in her voice. Then let me teach you the primary rule of this institution. She stopped, standing over him. A silver-haired goddess of death. The rule is this. Naruto Uzumaki and those he protects are, by my decree, exempt from your pathetic regulations. Touch them again, and I will personally dismantle your committee, your authority, and then, very slowly, you. She leaned down, her face inches from his, a terrifyingly beautiful smile on her lips. Do you understand, little fox? Kuyo couldn't speak. He could only manage a series of frantic, terrified nods. Good. She straightened up, turning her back on him as if he no longer existed. Her crimson eyes found Naruto's. She walked toward him, taking the rosary from his outstretched hand. You are making a habit of this, she said, her voice losing its edge, becoming something more intimate, a conversation between equals. But, your timing is improving. He was going to hurt our friends, Naruto said simply. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through her eyes. A noble reason. She paused, her fingers tracing the silver cross. This authority you're building, be careful. In this world, when you stand at the top of a mountain, everyone below either wants to climb it or tear it down. Without another word, she fastened the rosary around her neck. The transformation reversed, the silver hair receding, the crimson eyes softening. Outer Moka stumbled forward, looking around at the terrified, kneeling disciplinary committee and the utterly silent student body. Did I do something again? She asked, her voice small. Naruto put a steadying hand on her shoulder. You helped, he said with a smile. He looked at Kuyo, who was now being helped to his feet by his subordinates. Their eyes met, and Naruto saw no more arrogance. Only a deep, burning resentment and fear. The threat was gone, for now. But he had made a powerful, permanent enemy. High in the clock tower, Kageyama put down his binoculars, his expression grim. He activated his scroll. Less than report. Greater than. He has defeated the head of the disciplinary committee. He consciously and strategically released the vampire's power to end the conflict. His control is absolute. He is not a mere vessel, he is a wielder. He is creating a power block, consolidating allies. The voice that answered was colder than ever before. Less than the observation phase is over. The potential for contamination is too high. The council has authorized direct intervention. You will proceed to phase 2. Isolate the target. Test his absolute limits. Prepare for extraction, or, if necessary, neutralization. Greater than. Understood, Kageyama said, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Phase 2. He hadn't expected it to be authorized so soon. He looked down at the courtyard, where Naruto was laughing with his friends, a small island of warmth in a sea of monsters. He was a boy who knew nothing of his own past, creating a future that was about to become a war zone. And Kageyama, against his own will, was being forced to light the first fire. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Kindness of Strangers. The academy settled into a new, strange equilibrium. Naruto Uzumaki and his mismatched group of friends had become an unofficial, untouchable power. Kuyo and H's white uniformed disciplinary committee were ghosts, fading into the background whenever Naruto's group approached, their previous arrogance replaced by a simmering, fearful resentment. Other students, the ones who had lived in the shadows of bullies like Saizo, began to see Naruto not as a threat, but as a shield. A trio of goblins, once the preferred targets for a brutish orc's locker stuffing hobby, now found the orc bowing politely and holding the door for them whenever Naruto was in the same hallway. A timid Yuki Onna, whose cold aura often caused accidental frostbite and subsequent ridicule, was surprised to find Naruto sitting with her at lunch, completely unaffected by the chill, talking about the weather. He never made a grand show of it, never declared himself a protector. He simply existed, and his presence created a space where the less powerful could breathe a little easier. This new reality was on full display in the school library. Naruto, Moka, and Sukune were trying to decipher a particularly dense passage on the history of yokai-human relations, a subject Sukune found morbidly fascinating and Naruto found mind-numbingly dull. Kurumu, in her self-appointed role as devoted servant friend, was perched on a stool behind Naruto, vigorously fanning him with a large, ornate fan she'd produced from thin air. Naruto-sama, is the air temperature to your liking? She chirped. I can generate a warmer breeze if you prefer. Or perhaps a cooling mist. I'm fine, Kurumu. You're going to give yourself a cramp, he said without looking up from the book, an amused smile playing on his lips. Nonsense. My arm is tireless in its devotion to your comfort, she declared, fanning with renewed vigor. Moka giggled, leaning closer to Naruto, her shoulder brushing against his. She's certainly dedicated. A comfortable, innocent warmth spread from the point of contact, a stark contrast to the glacial power of her other self. He found he liked this Moka's gentle presence just as much as he respected the other's indomitable will. They were two sides of a coin, and the coin itself was fascinating. It was into this scene of domestic absurdity that a new problem walked. A girl with mousy brown hair and glasses, her uniform rumpled and her eyes red-rimmed from crying, approached their table, flanked by two equally miserable-looking boys. She wrung her hands, hesitating as if approaching a royal court. "You Uzumaki-san," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto looked up, his friendly smile instantly putting her at ease. "Yeah, what's up? My name is Kanue. These are my friends, Kenji and Hachi," she said, gesturing to the boys. We need your help. There's someone, a student, he's been tormenting us. Stealing our things, destroying our homework. The teachers won't do anything. And the disciplinary committee," she trailed off, casting a fearful glance around the library. The implication was clear. The committee only protected the powerful. Naruto's smile faded, replaced by a calm, serious focus. "Tell me everything. Kanue explained that the bully was a powerful, shadowy figure who operated out of the long-abandoned schoolhouse on the far side of the campus. He was too strong for them to fight, too clever to be caught. They were his chosen victims, and their lives had become a nightmare. Kurumu stopped fanning, her violet eyes narrowing. Sounds like a coward, preying on the weak. Pathetic. We have to help them, Moka said immediately, her expression firm. Naruto nodded. It wasn't even a question. This was exactly the kind of thing he'd been subconsciously deterring. The idea that it was still happening, hidden in the school's shadows, ignited a cold anger in his gut. All right, we'll take care of it. Show us where this guy's hideout is. A wave of relief washed over the trio's faces, so profound it was almost theatrical. Oh, thank you, Uzumaki-san. Kanue cried, bowing deeply. He's usually there after last period. We can show you the way. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the grounds, the small group made their way toward the old schoolhouse. It stood silhouetted against the blood-orange sky, a skeletal ruin of rotting timber and shattered windows. An aura of neglect and sorrow clung to it, a place the academy had chosen to forget. They say it's haunted, Sukune whispered, sticking close to Naruto. That a powerful poltergeist was sealed inside decades ago after it went on a rampage. Don't worry, Sukune-kun, Kurumu said, puffing out her chest. I will protect you from any nasty ghosts. Kanue and her friends led them to the heavy, creaking front doors. He's in there, Kenji whispered, pointing a trembling finger. We're too scared to go inside. But we'll stand watch out here. Naruto gave him a reassuring nod. Stay safe. He pushed the door open, the groan of ancient hinges echoing into the dusty darkness within. The air was stale, thick with the scent of Ike and something else, something sharp and ozone-like. The five of them stepped inside, Naruto in the lead, Moka and Kurumu flanking him, with Sukune bringing up the rear. The moment the door swung shut behind them, the world lurched. The layout of the entrance hall seemed to shift, the hallway ahead of them stretching to an impossible length while the door they'd just entered simply vanished, replaced by a solid, stone wall. A faint, glowing script, intricate and complex, flared to life across the walls and floor before fading back into invisibility. It's a barrier, Kurumu said, her voice tight with alarm. A powerful one. This is a trap. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He cursed his own trusting nature. The fear on Kanue's face had been genuine, but it wasn't fear of a bully. It was the fear of a pawn about to betray a king. Everyone, stay close. They moved forward cautiously, the only sound the crunch of broken glass under their feet. The very architecture of the place seemed designed to disorient them. A staircase would lead to a blank wall. A door would open into the same room they'd just left. Then, the trap sprung. As they passed through a wide archway, a shimmering wall of energy slammed down between them, separating Naruto from the other three. It happened in an instant, a silent, impassable barrier of light. Naruto, Moka cried, pressing her hands against the warm, humming surface. I'm fine, he called back, his voice slightly muffled. It's just a wall. Look for another way around. He turned to analyze his own situation, but the hallway behind him had changed, twisting into a single, uninviting path leading deeper into the schoolhouse. He was being funneled, isolated. On the other side of the barrier, Kurumu's eyes glowed as she examined the energy wall. This isn't normal yokai magic. It's cleaner, more precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. Suddenly, from the shadows around them, figures emerged. It was Kanue, Kenji, and Hachi, but they were not alone. A dozen other students, all with the same grim, determined expressions, surrounded them. They held not weapons, but strange, ornate talismans and ropes that glowed with a faint, silvery light. What is the meaning of this? Kurumu demanded, her wings snapping out from her back, her claws extending. Our apologies, Kanue said, her voice no longer timid but cold and steady. Our target is Naruto Uzumaki. You are merely collateral. Please do not resist. The students advanced, and the battle was joined. Kurumu was a whirlwind of motion, but her claws sparked harmlessly against the energy projected from the talismans. A thrown rope wrapped around her ankle, and she cried out as it burned against her skin, sapping her strength. These weren't ordinary tools. They were designed specifically to neutralize yokai. Meanwhile, Naruto walked the path laid out for him. He could feel the eyes on him, knew he was being watched. The anger in his gut was a cold, controlled fire now. He had been played, his desire to protect others used as a weapon against him. He entered a vast, cavernous gymnasium, the floorboards groaning under his weight. In the center of the room, a hulking figure stood waiting. It was 10 feet tall, crafted from obsidian black stone and etched with the same glowing runes that sealed the building. It had no face, only a single, cyclopean eye that glowed with a malevolent, purple light. It was a golem, but it felt wrong. It radiated no life force, no demonic energy, no soul. It was a construct of pure, unfeeling magic. From a hidden observation room high above, Mr. Cage Yama watched on a series of enchanted crystal viewers. One showed Naruto facing the golem. Another showed Kurumu and Moka struggling against the student task force. The target is isolated, he reported into his scroll. The null golem has been engaged. Phase 2 is proceeding. The golem moved, its stone limbs grinding as it raised a massive arm. The purple eye flared, and it fired a beam of raw, concussive force. Naruto dodged, the beam obliterating the wall where he'd been standing. He moved with blinding speed, appearing at the golem's side, his fist cocked back. He threw a punch, a simple, physical strike. It connected with the golem's torso with the force of a cannonball, but the stone merely rippled, the runes flaring as they absorbed the kinetic energy. Naruto leapt back as the golem swung a clumsy but devastating fist, shattering the floorboards. He was beginning to understand. This thing wasn't meant to be fought, it was meant to endure. To test, he raised a hand, forming the familiar vortex of wind. As the golem fired another beam, he caught it, just as he had Kuyo's fire. But this time, something was different. The energy was more violent, more chaotic. As he tried to compress and snuff it out, it overloaded his control. The vortex exploded outward, throwing him back across the room. The golem's eye flared again, and this time, a swirling vortex of wind, an exact copy of Naruto's own technique, shot out and slammed into him. It learns, Naruto realized, skidding to a halt. It absorbs and replicates. This was a perfect opponent, designed specifically to counter him. Brute force was absorbed. His own energy techniques were turned against him. He was trapped in a sealed room with a monster that was a perfect mirror. He had to think, to adapt. Back in the hallway, the fight was going badly. Kurumu was entangled in several energy-sapping ropes. Sukune was doing his best to help, throwing debris at their attackers, but he was quickly subdued. Moka fought fiercely, but her human-level strength was no match for a dozen prepared opponents. They were being herded, contained. One of the students, Kenji, lunged, grabbing the front of Moka's blazer, his other hand reaching for the rosary. In her desperation, Moka twisted away, stumbling backward over a pile of rubble. She fell hard, her chest slamming against the corner of a broken, upturned desk. The impact was focused directly on the silver cross. With a sharp snap, the chain broke. The rosary clattered to the floor. Silence. The oppressive, soul-crushing wave of power that signaled the transformation washed through the old schoolhouse. The runes on the walls flickered and died, unable to contain such a monumental force. The energy barrier separating them from Naruto shattered into a million pieces of fading light. Kanue and her fellow students froze, their faces turning pale with a terror they had only heard about in stories. They slowly turned to face the girl who was now rising to her feet. The mousy pink hair was gone, replaced by a flowing mane of spectral silver. Her eyes, now blazing crimson, held no warmth, no mercy. Only the cold, detached fury of a true monarch. "You have made," Inner Moka said, her voice a deathly calm whisper that cut through the silence, "a grave mistake." In the gymnasium, Naruto felt the shift. He felt Moka's power erupt, a familiar and welcome cataclysm. The null golem felt it too. Its single eye swiveled, trying to process the new energy source. That was the opening Naruto needed. His instincts screamed at him. Not a memory, but muscle memory, a true. His body knew even if his mind did not. He needed a different kind of power. Not a wave, not a vortex, but a point. A focused, rotating sphere of absolute destruction. The word bloomed in his mind, Rasengan. He brought his hands together, focusing, trying to recall the dream-like steps. The swirling energy he'd used against Kuyo began to gather in his palm, but this time he didn't release it. He forced it to spin, to compress. It was unstable, violent, fighting his control, a miniature hurricane in his hand. The golem, sensing the incredible power spike, categorized it as the primary threat. It ignored the vampire's energy signature, its programming locking onto Naruto. It began to absorb all the ambient magical energy in the room, its entire body glowing as it prepared its ultimate attack, a massive, sustained beam of all the power it had absorbed and copied. Inner Moka, meanwhile, moved. She was not a brawler, she was an artist of destruction. A single, elegant kick sent Kenji flying through a wall. A flick of her wrist sent a wave of invisible force that disarmed and incapacitated half a dozen others. Kanue stared in horror as her entire force was dismantled in seconds with contemptuous ease. Moka started moving toward the gymnasium, drawn by the titanic clash of energies she could feel building. The null golem unleashed its attack, a blinding white beam of pure power that tore up the floor as it shot toward Naruto. He didn't try to block it. He didn't try to dodge. With the unstable, half-formed Rasengan blazing in his hand, he charged forward, running straight into the path of the beam. The raw energy washed over him, searing, but he pushed through it, his eyes locked on the golem's core. He wasn't fighting the attack, he was attacking the source. He slammed the chaotic sphere of wind into the golem's chest. For a moment, there was no sound. Then, two opposing forces of nature met. The Rasengan's violent, omnidirectional rotation didn't just counter the golem's energy. It tore it apart on a fundamental level. The runes etched into the golem's body overloaded, shattered. An explosion of white light and shrieking wind erupted from the point of impact, Kansu. Ming the golem and blowing the gymnasium's walls outward. Inner Moka arrived just as the light faded. She saw Naruto standing in the center of a crater, breathing heavily, his uniform singed, his right hand scraped and raw. The null golem was gone, reduced to dust. The remaining student captors had fled in the chaos. Their eyes met across the ruined space. He had survived. He had won. But she could see the cost. This wasn't a simple victory. He had been tested, pushed to a limit he didn't know he had. "They're trying to figure out what you are," she said, her voice a low, serious murmur. He looked down at his trembling hand. Then back up at her, his blue eyes hard as diamonds. "And I'm starting to wonder the same thing." In his observation room, Mr. Kageyama stared at the shattered crystal viewers, his face ashen. The null golem, a priceless construct of the Council's highest artifice, was destroyed. The vampire had been released. The target had revealed an entirely new form of power manipulation, a technique of terrifyingly focused destructive capability. Phase 2 was a complete and utter failure. Less than report, greater than the voice in the scroll commanded, colder than the void. Kageyama swallowed hard. The test failed. The target's power is exponentially greater than we projected. He is not a vessel. He is the source. The Council must be warned. Neutralization may no longer be an option. There was a long, dreadful silence from the scroll before the voice returned, laced with a new and terrible gravity. Less than then containment is the only path left. Proceed to Phase 3. If the boy cannot be controlled, he will be buried. Along with that entire, wretched island. Greater than. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Scars and Whispers. The dust of the obliterated golem settled, coating everything in the ruined gymnasium in a fine, gray powder. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Naruto's ragged breaths. He stood in the epicenter of the destruction he had wrought, his right arm hanging limp at his side, his hand a mess of raw, scraped flesh. The chaotic energy of the incomplete Rasengan had been just as punishing to the wielder as it had been to the target. Inner Moka stood at the edge of the crater, her silver hair unstirred by the lingering currents of wind, her crimson eyes taking in every detail. She saw the exhaustion warring with adrenaline in his stance, the pain he refused to show on his face, and the unwavering strength in his eyes. She saw a warrior. "They didn't intend to kill you," she said, her voice a low murmur that carried easily across the wreckage. It wasn't an accusation, but an analysis. That construct, it was designed to test you, to measure your limits and copy your abilities. A tool of intelligence, not assassination. Naruto flexed his raw fingers, a sharp jolt of pain shooting up his arm. Yeah, I got that impression. He looked at her, his gaze intense. Who builds a tool like that just for a school assignment? Before she could answer, Kurumu and Sukune scrambled into the gymnasium. Their eyes wide with shock at the scale of the devastation. Kurumu, freed from her energy-sapping bonds, was back at full strength, her wings fluttering with agitation. Naruto, are you all right? She cried, rushing to his side. Her usual seductive confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, genuine concern that was far more compelling. She saw his hand and gasped, her violet eyes filling with a mixture of horror and fury. Who did this to you? I'll tear them apart. We're okay, Kurumu, Naruto said, his voice softer now. Everyone's safe. Inner Moka watched their interaction. A flicker of something unreadable in her expression. She walked toward him, her movements silent and fluid. The remaining student attackers had long since fled, leaving behind only the evidence of their sophisticated trap. Moka stopped in front of him, holding the broken rosary in her palm. The silver cross glinted in the dim light filtering through the holes in the roof. This enemy is different, she said. Her voice meant for him alone. They are not brutish thugs or arrogant rivals. They are organized, cautious, and they are afraid of what you are. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. In her eyes, he didn't see a monster. He saw a queen, a strategist, a being who understood the violent, lonely language of power as well as he did. He reached out with his uninjured left hand and gently took the rosary from her. Thank you, he said. The words were for more than just the fight. They were for the understanding, for the brief, perfect clarity of standing beside an equal. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Do not get used to calling on me for every little skirmish. I am not a weapon to be drawn at your convenience. I know, he replied seriously. I only call you when I know I need a partner, not a weapon. Her crimson eyes widened slightly at his choice of words. Before the moment could stretch further, he carefully, gently, refastened the broken chain of the rosary and settled it back around her neck. The transformation was as jarring as ever, but this time it felt different. Softer. The overwhelming pressure receded. The silver hair bled back to pink, and the crimson eyes softened to a gentle green. Outer Moka blinked, taking in the scene, the crater, the ruined walls, Naruto's hand, and her face crumpled with worry. Naruto, your hand, you're hurt, she exclaimed, her own fear for him overriding any confusion about what had happened. She immediately took his injured arm, her touch surprisingly gentle as she examined the raw flesh. We have to get you to the infirmary. Now. The school infirmary was run by a nurse who was, perhaps, the most unsettling yokai Naruto had yet encountered. Her name was Ririko, and at first glance, she seemed to be a perfectly normal, if slightly severe, human nurse. Then she'd moved her head to look at a chart, and her head had floated a full 2 inches off her neck. Connected only by a wisp of purple smoke. She was a Dullahan, a headless horseman, who carried her head under her arm when she was on her rounds outside. It was a testament to how strange his life had become that Naruto barely batted an eye. Ririko, her head now firmly reattached, tutted as she cleaned his wounds. Residual energy abrasion. Nasty stuff. You've been playing with powers you don't fully understand, haven't you, boy? This isn't a clean wound. It's like you scraped your hand on a spinning star. It'll heal, but it's going to scar. As she wrapped Hi's hand in bandages infused with a foul-smelling yokai healing salve, Kurumu pushed past Moka. Here, let me. She placed her hands gently over Naruto's bandaged one. Her eyes closed, and a soft, warm, pinkish aura enveloped her hands. Naruto felt a soothing coolness seep into his wound, easing the throbbing ache to a dull hum. It wasn't healing the injury, but it was draining the pain away. It's a minor application of a succubus. Chapter 6. The weight of a name. The scar on Naruto's right palm was a pale, ragged spiral, a permanent testament to the untamed power that churned within him. It was a brand of his own making, and in the quiet moments between classes, he would trace its shape with the fingers of his other hand. It didn't hurt anymore, but it was a constant, physical reminder. He had a weapon in his soul he didn't know how to aim, a history he couldn't access, and an enemy he couldn't see. His circle of friends had become a strange, comforting anchor in the storm of his life. After the incident in the old schoolhouse, their bond had solidified. Moka's gentle concern was a constant presence at his side, her warmth a soothing balm. Kurumu's loyalty, though still theatrically expressed, had found a core of fierce sincerity. She had traded her fan for a first aid kit and now appointed herself his official bodyguard, a role she took with deadly seriousness. Even Sukune, the perpetually out of his depth human, provided a necessary grounding, a link to a normality that Naruto vaguely remembered and deeply missed. This fragile peace was the calm before the storm, and the first gust of wind arrived in the form of a new transfer student. His name was Jin Ichija, and he was everything Naruto was not. Where Naruto was a mystery, Jin was an open book, the celebrated heir to the prestigious Ichija clan of Kitsune. Yokai nobility of the highest order. Where Naruto's power was a raw, untamed force, Jin's was a refined, elegant art, manifesting as shimmering silver flames that danced with controlled grace. He was handsome, impossibly charming, and moved with the easy confidence of a man born to rule. He didn't enter the classroom, he made an entrance. The girls swooned, and the boys stared with a mixture of envy and admiration. He introduced himself to the class with a smile that could disarm armies, his silver eyes sweeping the room before landing, with practiced precision, on Naruto's group. Later that day, he approached their table by the lake. He didn't swagger or posture. He walked with a humble grace that was more commanding than any show of force. "Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice as smooth as polished silver. "It is an honor. The stories of your strength and courage have spread far and wide." He offered a slight, respectful bow. "My name is Jin Ichija. I hope we can be friends." Naruto felt a primal, instinctual warning bell go off in the back of his mind. It was the same feeling he got just before a punch was thrown, the subtle shift in the air that signaled imminent danger. But Jin's smile was flawless, his posture open, his energy calm and welcoming. There was nothing to pinpoint, nothing to grasp. It was like trying to punch smoke. "Sure," Naruto said, his own voice carefully neutral. Moka, however, was flustered and charmed. "Ichija-san, it's a pleasure to meet you. We've all heard of your family. Please, call me Jin," he insisted, his smile deepening as he focused on her. "And the honor is all mine, Akashiya Haim." He used the honorific for princess, a bold but strangely fitting title for her. "Your lineage is as legendary as your beauty." Kurumu narrowed her eyes, her succubus senses trying to get a read on him. She could feel his power. It was immense, like a deep, cold lake, but his charm was not the invasive, mind-clouding type she used. It was natural, practiced, a product of centuries of aristocratic breeding. He was a politician, not a predator, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. In the clock tower, Mr. Kageyama watched the scene through his crystal viewer. Phase 3. Containment. It was no longer about testing Naruto's limits, but about building a cage around him. A social cage. He touched his communication scroll. Less than report. Greater than. Subject Ichija has made contact with the target and his associates, Kageyama said, his voice flat. Initial interaction is proceeding as planned. Ichija is working to gain their trust and create a social rift. The cold voice from the scroll replied, less than the Ichija clan has much to gain from the council's favor. Ensure their heir understands the stakes. The target must be isolated. If his companions are the source of his stability, they must be removed from the equation. Emotionally, if not physically. Greater than. Kageyama looked at the image in the crystal. He saw a group of kids talking by a lake. A vampire, a succubus, a human, and a boy with no past. They weren't a power block. They were friends. A cold nod of something he refused to name tightened in his stomach. Understood. Jin was a master strategist. He never challenged Naruto. In fact, he praised him at every opportunity. When Naruto effortlessly won a PE wrestling match, Jin was the first to applaud his natural combat genius. When a lesson on yokai history came up, Jin would defer to Naruto's practical experience. He was building Naruto up, placing him on a pedestal. But pedestals are lonely, isolating places. His true target was the foundation of that pedestal, Moka. He brought her rare flowers that only bloomed in the yokai world. He discussed the intricate politics of the vampire clans. With a depth of knowledge that fascinated her. He spoke of the burden of carrying a great and terrible power, a feeling she knew all too well. He wasn't trying to seduce her like Kurumu had tried with Naruto. He was positioning himself as her peer, the only one who could truly understand her station. The first crack in the group's foundation appeared a week later. There was a school-wide festival, a rare event designed to let the students blow off steam. Jin had, through his family's influence, arranged for a spectacular fireworks display. He formally invited Moka to watch it with him from a private balcony. As befits two of the academy's most distinguished students. Moka hesitated, looking toward Naruto. We were all going to go together. Of course, Jin said smoothly, his silver eyes glinting with false understanding. But think of the message it would send. The two most powerful lineages at the academy, standing together. It would promote unity, stability. It is a political responsibility, in a way. He had framed it perfectly. To refuse would seem petty. To accept was a duty. Naruto saw the trap. We're not politicians, Jin. We're friends trying to watch some fireworks. Jin's smile didn't falter. Some of us do not have the luxury of being just friends, Naruto-kun. Power carries a weight. A name carries a weight. Some of us understand that. He looked pointedly at Naruto's blank expression. And some of us don't have a name that carries any weight at all. It was the first direct hit, and it landed perfectly. A subtle reminder of Naruto's unknown origins, a jab that painted him as a commoner. An outsider who couldn't possibly understand the world Moka inhabited. Moka flinched, feeling the sting of the insult on Naruto's behalf. But the logic of Jin's argument, the appeal to a duty she'd been raised to respect, was strong. Conflicted, she looked to Naruto for guidance. He just gave a small shrug, his face unreadable. Go ahead, Moka, have fun. He turned and walked away. Kurumu and Sukune trailing in his wake, leaving her standing with the smiling, victorious Kitsune. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at Jin for making her choose, and angry at himself for not having the words. The history, the name to fight back on that battlefield. They watched the fireworks from the crowded school grounds. Kurumu was fuming, muttering about silver-haired snakes and smug nobles. Sukune was quiet, watching Naruto's stoic profile, silhouetted against the explosions of color in the sky. He's trying to break us apart, Naruto said, his voice low. He won't succeed, Kurumu declared fiercely. We're your friends, Naruto. Your real friends. But as Naruto looked up at the distant balcony where two figures stood watching the sky, he felt a profound sense of isolation. Jin was right. A name carried weight, and his own name, Naruto Uzumaki, felt impossibly light, a word with no history, no family, no world attached to it. It was just a sound. The climax of Jin's campaign came during a specially arranged combat demonstration in the main arena. He had proposed it as a way to foster friendly competition and showcase the diversity of yokai abilities. In reality, it was his stage. He moved through his opponents with the grace of a dancer, his silver fox fire a beautiful, deadly spectacle. He wasn't brutal. He was precise, disabling his sparring partners with minimal effort and maximum flair. After each victory, he would bow, accepting the thunderous applause of the student body. He was winning their hearts and minds. Finally, he stood in the center of the arena, his silver flames extinguished. For my final demonstration, he announced, his voice magically amplified, I would like to invite the man you all know to be the most powerful among us. The man whose strength protects the weak. Naruto Uzumaki. It was a challenge disguised as an honor. The entire school was watching. To refuse would be to show fear. Naruto walked into the arena, the murmur of the crowd a low hum. He faced Jin, the kitsune's charming smile a perfect mask of sportsmanship. No need to hold back, Naruto-kun, Jin said, his voice dropping so only Naruto could hear. Show them the monster they all whisper about. Show them the uncontrollable power that needs a leash. Jin attacked. He didn't lunge. He sent waves of his silver fire, not to burn, but to herd Naruto. To force him into clumsy-looking dodges, to make him look reactive while Jin looked proactive. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare fought with elemental power. You see, Jin called out to the crowd. True power is not about brute force. It is about control, about discipline. It is about upholding the legacy of a great name. He shot a pointed look toward Moka, who was watching from the stands with a worried expression. It is about being a worthy guardian for those precious to you, not just a mindless shield. The words hit Moka harder than any physical blow. A mindless shield. Was that what Naruto was? Was his protection reckless? Was Jin's way, the way of control, of politics, of lineage, the right one? Her heart was a storm of confusion. Her loyalty to Naruto warred with the centuries of ingrained doctrine Jin represented. The emotional turmoil was immense, a pressure building inside her, focused on the rosary at her throat. The silver cross began to glow with a faint, pulsing red light. Inner Moka was listening, and she was not pleased. Naruto, however, remained calm. He stopped dodging. He stood still as a wave of silver fire washed toward him. He raised his scarred right hand. The wind vortex appeared, but it was small, controlled, no bigger than his palm. He didn't absorb the fire. He met it, his spinning chakra acting as a perfect, impenetrable shield, arting the flames around him like water around a stone. He looked at Jin, his blue eyes clear and steady. You talk a lot about names, Jin. You talk about legacy and control. Naruto took a step forward, and the entire arena seemed to fall silent, leaning in to hear his quiet words. A name is just a word. A legacy is just the story of what other people did. I don't have a story. I don't have a legacy. He took another step. Jin's smile finally faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in his silver eyes. So I'll have to make my own. And my story starts with protecting my friends. Not for politics, not for a message, but because they're my friends. That's all the reason I need. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't power up. He just spoke a simple, undeniable truth. And in that moment, he was more powerful than Jin and all his silver fire. He had taken Jin's greatest weapon, his own unknown past, and turned it into his greatest strength. He wasn't defined by a name. He was defined by his actions. The spell was broken. The crowd was silent, but Moka's eyes were shining, the red glow from her cross fading away. The confusion was gone, replaced by a sudden, fierce clarity. She knew who her real friend was. Jin stared, momentarily speechless. He had lost. He hadn't been beaten, but he had been defeated. He had tried to fight a political battle, and Naruto had won by refusing to fight at all. With a tight, forced smile, Jin raised his hands. A noble sentiment, he declared, trying to reclaim control. A truly magnificent display of spirit. Let's hear it for Naruto Uzumaki. The applause was hesitant at first, then grew. But it was different from the applause Jin had received. It was laced with a new kind of respect. Later that night, Naruto stood alone by the Crimson Lake, staring at his reflection in the water. Jin's attack had failed, but his words still echoed. A name carries weight. He had won the battle for his friends' hearts, but the war for his own identity was just beginning. He looked at the spiral scar on his palm. It was his only link to a past he couldn't remember, a power he didn't understand. He had to find answers. He couldn't keep fighting shadows. The whispers in his soul were getting louder, coalescing around a single, powerful word he didn't understand but felt in his very bones. Jinchuriki. He had to know what it meant. He had to know the weight of his own name. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Price of Knowledge. In the wake of Jin Ichiji's failed social coup, a subtle but significant shift occurred. He remained at the academy, a silver-haired specter of nobility. His charming smile now tinged with a wary respect. He kept his distance, observing Naruto's group from afar, a silent player in a game whose rules he was beginning to realize he didn't fully understand. His defeat had not broken the group, it had tempered them, burning away their insecurities and forging their bonds into something harder and more resilient. They were a strange, unshakable unit. Moka's gentle affection was more open, her trust in Naruto absolute. Kurumu's devotion had shed its last vestiges of seduction, replaced by a pugnacious, sisterly protectiveness. She'd taken to carrying not just a first aid kit, but a small arsenal of yokai disabling caltrops and smoke bombs, just in case. Sukune, having survived bullies, vampires, succubi, and political machinations, had found a core of surprising courage. He was still terrified, but he was no longer helpless. It was Naruto who had changed the most. The confrontation with Jin had crystallized his purpose. He could no longer afford to be a man adrift, defined only by the events happening to him. He needed to know who he was, not for a legacy or a name, but for himself. He brought it up during a quiet lunch, tracing the spiral scar on his palm. "I need answers," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm done waiting for them to fall out of the sky." "What do you mean, Naruto?" Moka asked, tilting her head. "This word keeps echoing in my head." "Jinchuriki," he said, the foreign word feeling strange on his tongue. "I don't know what it means, but it feels important. Like it's the key to everything." Kurumu frowned. "Jinchuriki. It doesn't sound like any yokai I've ever heard of. If it's a word related to power, or to the supernatural, there's only one place at this school that would have information," Sukune said. His eyes lighting up with academic curiosity. "The library." But it wasn't that simple. They spent the afternoon searching the public stacks, their initial optimism slowly fading into frustration. They found nothing. No mention in yokai encyclopedias, no reference in historical texts. It was as if the word didn't exist. "It's being deliberately kept hidden," Naruto concluded, slamming a dusty tome shut. "Which means whatever it is, it's dangerous." It was Moka who found the clue. In a forgotten addendum to the library's charter, she found a reference to the special collection, an archive of forbidden texts. Sealed genealogies, and knowledge deemed too dangerous for the general student body. It was colloquially known as the Sunken Archive, because its entrance was rumored to be in the library's sub-basement. A place that had been flooded and abandoned for decades. "The archive is not unguarded," Moka read, her finger tracing the faded script. "It is protected by the head archivist, Shiori-sensei. A Baku bound to the collection. She guards the knowledge by, oh my." Moka's face went pale. "She consumes the memories of any who try to access the archive without permission." "A dream eater," Kurumu breathed, a flicker of genuine fear in her violet eyes. "They don't just take the memory of what you did. They can take who you are. Your childhood, your family, your name, everything." Sukune shuddered. "So, to get a memory, Naruto has to risk all of his." "I don't have any to risk," Naruto said, his voice grim. The irony was bitter. His greatest weakness was now his only defense against the Guardian. "It's a risk I have to take. We have to get in there." Their plan was less a heist and more of a controlled infiltration. That night, under the sliver of a crescent moon, they met outside the library's imposing doors. Kurumu, cloaked in shadows, flew to a high window, using her succubus charm to subtly befuddle the low-level yokai security guard into taking an early break. Sukune, using his knowledge of the school's aging infrastructure, pointed out a weak point in the foundation near the flooded basement, a crumbling maintenance hatch hidden behind a tangle of thorny vines. It was a non-magical solution to a magical problem, a detail the security-obsessed yokai had overlooked for years. They slipped inside, the air immediately growing cold and damp. The sub-basement was a labyrinth of flooded corridors and rusting pipes. The water was waist-deep, black, and stagnant. Moka produced a small, glowing orb of yokai light, illuminating a path forward. She pointed to a set of heavy, bronze doors at the end of a long hallway, almost completely submerged. Faint, ethereal symbols glowed on their surface. "That's it. A binding seal," she whispered. "It's designed to repel any yokai with ill intent." "What about a yokai with good intent?" Kurumu asked. "The seal doesn't care about your intentions," Moka replied. "Only that you're not supposed to be here." Naruto waded forward. He had no ill intent. He just wanted the truth. He placed his hand on the door, and the seals flared violently, a wave of hostile energy pushing him back. "It's no good," he grunted. He looked at Moka. What if the one trying to open it isn't a yokai at all? Understanding dawned on her face. Sukune. Hesitantly, Sukune waded forward. As a human, he had no yokai aura for the seals to react to. He placed his trembling hands on the bronze doors. The seals remained dormant. With a great, collective heave from all four of them, the ancient doors groaned open, revealing a stone staircase that led up, out of the water, and into the darkness. The sunken archive was eerily silent. It was a vast, circular chamber, its walls lined with thousands of scrolls and books, all chained to the shelves. In the center of the room, a woman sat in a high-backed chair, seemingly asleep. She was beautiful in a faded, timeless way, with long, pale hair and a simple gray kimono. This was Shiori, the Baku. The air around her felt heavy with the ghosts of stolen memories. "Be careful, Naruto-sama," Kurumu whispered. "One touch from her." Naruto nodded, his eyes fixed on the sleeping archivist. He took a step forward, and her eyes snapped open. They were a soft, misty lavender, and they seemed to look straight through him, into the vast, empty space where his past should be. "A curious visitor," she said, her voice a soft, rustling sound, like turning pages. "You have come seeking knowledge, but you have no memories to wager for it." A blank slate. How tragic. "I'm not here to make a wager," Naruto said, his voice steady. "I need to know what a Jinchuriki is." Shiori's placid expression tightened for a fraction of a second. "That word, it has been a long time since anyone has dared to speak it in this hall. That knowledge is not for you. It brings only pain and madness." "The not knowing is worse," Naruto countered. "I have a right to know who I am. Rights are for those who can remember them," she replied, her voice still soft, but with an edge of steel. She rose from her chair, her form seeming to waver and flicker at the edges. "But I am bound by my duty. The archive must be protected. If you wish to proceed, you must prove you are strong enough to withstand the knowledge you seek. Since you have no memories of your own for me to test, you will face the echoes of those who came before you." She raised a hand, and the world dissolved. Naruto wasn't in the library anymore. He was standing on a battlefield under a blood-red moon. A monstrous, nine-tailed fox of pure, malevolent energy was leveling a mountain with a sweep of its tail. He felt a surge of unimaginable rage, an ancient, all-consuming hatred that was not his own. It was the fox's. A man with spiky blonde hair and a white coat, a look of grim determination on his face as he stood against the beast. He saw a woman with vibrant red hair, creating chains of golden light to bind the monster. He didn't know them, but their presence resonated in his soul with the force of a thunderclap. The scene shifted. He was in a dark, cavernous space, a sewer of the mind. Giant red bars sealed away the colossal fox, its hateful, slitted eye staring at him from the darkness. He felt a crushing loneliness, the weight of being a monster, a prisoner, and a cage all at once. Then, a new memory, not from his own past, but one Shiori had consumed. A terrified yokai scholar who had found the same word. The scholar's memory screamed with images of villages being annihilated, of human weapons of immense power, of children being turned into living prisons for beasts of war. The scholar's mind had shattered under the weight of the truth. But Naruto did not shatter. He stood in the swirling chaos of rage, sacrifice, and terror. And he found his center. He had no past to anchor him, but he had a present. He thought of Moka's smile, of Kurumu's fierce loyalty, of Sukune's quiet courage. They were his memories. They were his history. He faced the raging, spectral image of the fox and the screaming terror of the scholar's memory, and he felt a profound, unexpected pity. For the monster, for the man who sealed it, for the woman who aided him, for the scholars who had broken themselves on the truth. He accepted the pain. He accepted the horror. He would not let it define him. "I'm not them," he said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty through the dreamscape. "I'm not a monster. I'm not a weapon. I'm not a broken scholar. I'm Naruto Uzumaki." The chaos receded. He was back in the archive, standing before Shiori. A single, crystalline tear was tracing a path down her cheek. "In 1,000 years, she whispered, her voice filled with a strange awe, "no one has ever passed the test that way. They always try to fight the memories, to deny them. You embraced them. You found your own truth in the echoes of their pain." She reached out, her fingers shimmering with a soft, lavender light. She did not try to touch his head. Instead, she gently touched the center of his chest. "I cannot give you your memories, blank one," she said softly. "But I can give you the knowledge you seek. The price has been paid." Quote. A single, searing piece of information flooded his mind. It was not a memory, but a definition, crisp and clear and terrible, as if read from an ancient text. Jinchuriki. Literally, the power of human sacrifice. A term for a human who has had a tailed beast sealed within them. These individuals are often used as living weapons by their respective villages, containing godlike power at the cost of their own humanity. They are cages, tools, and pariahs, feared by all for the monster they hold at bay. The words echoed in the now silent library. Naruto stumbled back a step, the weight of the definition hitting him like a physical blow. A human sacrifice, a living weapon, a tool. Moka and Kurumu rushed to his side, steadying him. Naruto, what is it? What did you see? Moka asked, her voice filled with dread. He looked at them, at their worried faces. He looked at his scarred hand, the mark of a power he now knew was not his own. He was the cage for the nine-tailed monster from his vision. The whisker marks on his cheeks suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. But as he looked at his friends, he felt no despair. Only a cold, burning clarity. The definition was a piece of the puzzle. A vital one, but it was not the whole picture. It was what he was. It didn't have to be who he was. I know what I am now, he said, his voice quiet, but harder than steel. He met their gazes, one by one. I'm a cage, a weapon. I was designed to be a tool. He held up his hand, clenching it into a fist. But a tool is just an object until someone picks it up. I'm the one holding it now. And I decide what it's used for. From his hidden vantage point, alerted by the surge of psychic energy from the archive, Mr. Kageyama watched his crystal viewer with growing horror. He hadn't heard the words, but he had felt the shift. The target was no longer just aware of his power, he was seeking its source. He was learning. He activated his scroll, his hand trembling. Less than report, greater than. Phase 3 has failed, Kageyama said, his voice strained. Ichiji's efforts were unsuccessful. The target has breached the sunken archive. He knows what he is. I repeat, the Jinchuriki knows what he is. Containment is no longer possible. The silence from the scroll was longer, colder than ever before. When the voice finally came, it was not the voice of a spymaster or a counselor. It was the voice of a judge passing a final, inescapable sentence. Less than then the final sanction is authorized. We will not allow that power to awaken fully in a world so unprepared. If the cage is learning how to open the door, then the cage must be destroyed. All of it. Issue the Annihilation Protocol. The island of Yokai Academy is now a quarantine zone, to be cleansed by holy fire. No one gets out. Nothing survives. Greater than. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Sky Falls. The truth, once revealed, did not scream. It settled. It was a cold, heavy stone in the pit of Naruto's stomach, a new and terrible lens T. Hero which to view the empty landscape of his past. Jinchuriki. A living sacrifice. A cage. He looked at his friends, at the genuine, unadulterated fear on their faces. Fear for him, not of him. And the cold stone in his gut began to burn. Naruto. Moka's voice was a fragile whisper. She reached out, her hand hovering just over his scarred one, as if afraid touching it would hurt him more. Wait, Veer, that means, it doesn't change who you are. She's right, Kurumu said, her voice devoid of its usual theatrics. It was low, guttural, and pulsing with a rage that made her wings flex unconsciously. So you're a cage. Big deal. Every yokai at this school is a cage for a monster. Some of us just have better interior decorating. She jabbed a thumb at her own chest. The only thing that matters is the person driving. And that's you. Their acceptance was a shield, more real and more potent than any power he possessed. It extinguished the last lingering ember of fear and fanned the burning stone of his resolve into a forge. He was what he was. But they were who he was with. He managed a small, grim smile. Thanks. They left the sunken archive, climbing the stone steps back into the flooded sub-basement. As Sukune pushed open the heavy maintenance hatch, the night air that greeted them was wrong. The usual symphony of nocturnal yokai, the chirping of insect-like sprites, the distant howl of a lone wolf man, was gone. A dead, oppressive silence had fallen over the island, so profound that the rustling of leaves sounded like gunshots. And there was a hum. A low, bass thrum that was felt more than heard. A vibration in the bones and the teeth. Naruto's head snapped up, his senses screaming. The sky, which should have been a clear, star-dusted black, was slowly being veiled by a shimmering, golden film. It was like watching a dome of stained glass descend over the entire island. What is that? Sukune asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a voice echoed from the sky. It was not loud, but it was everywhere at once, a calm, dispassionate, genderless tone that spoke with the chilling finality of a machine. Less than quarantine protocol initiated. Containment of anomaly designation. Jinchuriki has failed. Annihilation sanction is now authorized. All life forms within the designated zone are to be cleansed. This is a message from the Anti-Deity Council. May your passing be swift. Greater than. The message repeated once, then silence returned, heavier and more terrifying than before. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then, the screaming began. From every corner of the campus, a wave of pure, unadulterated panic erupted. Council. Moka breathed, her face pale with dawning horror. They're a myth, a boogeyman story to scare yokai children. They seem pretty real to me. Kurumu yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the sky. The golden dome pulsed, and from its apex, a single, impossibly bright star ignited. It grew, elongated, and then fell. It was a spear of pure, white gold light. And it fell not with a roar, but with a terrifying, holy hiss. It struck the clock tower, the place where Mr. Kageyama had so often watched them, and the ancient stone structure did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving behind nothing but a fading afterimage against the night sky and a perfectly circular, cauterized hole in the ground. Then the sky began to bleed stars. Dozens, then hundreds of the light spears rained down. They were not a random barrage. They were a methodical grid, a cleansing pattern designed to erase everything. Each impact was silent, surgically precise, and absolute. A dormitory vanished. A section of the forest was carved away. The screams of the student body became choked, terrified gasps as they witnessed the absolute, untouchable power of their executioner. We have to move, Naruto yelled, his mind snapping into a state of hyper-focus. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. The library, the archive is underground. It's the only place that might be shielded. Another spear of light hissed down, aimed directly for their position. There was no time to think. There was only instinct. Naruto threw himself in front of his friends, his arms spread wide. He didn't think about his past, he didn't think about the monster. He roared, a sound of pure, defiant will, and called upon the fire in his gut. A wave of vermilion energy erupted from him, so hot it turned the air to glass. It was not the controlled wind of his Rasengan. It was chaotic, wild, and alive with rage. The energy solidified around him, forming a grotesque, skeletal ribcage of bubbling red chakra. A single, blazing red tail of the same energy lashed out behind him. The spear of holy fire struck the chakra construct, and for a terrifying second, the two forces met, white gold light versus primordial red rage. The holy fire dissolved, unable to penetrate the raw power of the nine tails. The chakra ribcage flickered and died, leaving Naruto on his knees, panting, the sudden expenditure of energy staggering him. The ground where he stood was scorched, and the air smelled of ozone and fury. Moka, Kurumu, and Sukune stared, their minds struggling to process what they had just seen. That power, it was ancient, terrifying, and it had just saved their lives. Naruto, Sama, Kurumu whispered, her voice filled with a new, profound awe. No time, Naruto gasped, forcing himself to his feet. Let's go. The journey to the library was a nightmare descent into chaos. Yokai, stripped of their thin veneer of civilization, had reverted to their base instincts. A hulking minotaur, mad with fear, charged through a crowd of smaller students. A flock of harpies shrieked overhead, their cries cut short as AV. Volley of light spears erased them from the sky. This was the council's true power. Not constructs or spies, it was the power to unmake the world. From a small, shielded office in the main school building, Mr. Kageyama watched the unfolding apocalypse on a dark crystal monitor. His face was the color of ash. The annihilation protocol was more terrible than the sterile reports had ever described. He saw students he had taught, whose names he knew, vanish in flashes of golden light. His hand rested on his communication scroll. His orders were to observe the cleansing, report on its efficacy, and then accept his own death as part of the quarantine. His duty, his loyalty. For what? A council that saw him, and everyone on this island, as acceptable losses. A council that feared a boy who had more nobility and compassion than any of them. He looked at the screen, at the image of Naruto, wreathed in red energy, shielding his friends. The cage was using its power not to destroy, but to protect. The conditioning of a lifetime broke. With a strangled cry of rage and regret, Kageyama shattered the monitor with his fist. He grabbed the scroll, not to report, but to find another frequency. A hidden emergency channel that was a death sentence to use. He had to warn them. He had to give them a chance. Naruto's group ran, a small island of purpose in a sea of terror. Kurumu flew ahead, her eyes scanning the sky, calling out warnings. 2 incoming. Left flank. Naruto would move, pulling Moka and Sukune with him as another section of the world was deleted. They passed the arena, where Jin Ichija stood, his silver fox fire forming a shimmering, dome-like shield over a group of terrified younger students. Their eyes met across the chaos, a shared look of grim understanding passing between the two rivals. The social games were over. This was about survival. They were halfway to the library when a spear of light struck the ground directly in front of them, carving a deep, glowing chasm and cutting off their path. From the other side, Kuyo, his white uniform torn and stained, stared at them, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. His carefully maintained order was literally being vaporized before his eyes. "There's no way across," Sukune yelled over the din. Before Naruto could answer, Moka stepped forward, her expression harder than he had ever seen it. "Naruto, the other me, you'll need her." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Her trust in him, in both of him, was absolute. Naruto nodded, his hand already reaching for the rosary. He didn't hesitate, he pulled. The transformation was instantaneous, a silent explosion of power that seemed to push back the chaos around them. Silver hair, crimson eyes. Inner Moka was here, and her face was a mask of cold, sublime fury. She didn't look at the sky. She looked at Naruto. "So this is the council's answer," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "To burn the board because they cannot capture a single piece. Pathetic." Another spear of light descended. Inner Moka didn't even glance at it. With a movement so fast it was a blur, she kicked a massive slab of shattered earth into the air. The slab intercepted the spear, and both were annihilated in a silent flash, buying them a precious few seconds. "The chasm," Naruto said, pointing. "We need to cross." Inner Moka smirked, a flash of her arrogant, dangerous self. "Hold on." She stomped her foot. The ground itself seemed to groan in protest. The earth at the edge of the chasm fractured, buckled, and then a massive pillar of stone erupted upwards, spanning the gap like a makeshift bridge. "Go," she commanded. They ran, crossing the bridge of shattered earth as the sky continued to fall around them. They finally reached the library, its heavy oak doors blasted open. Inside, dozens of students were huddled, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. Among them, nursing a burn on his arm, was Jin Ichija. Kuyo and the last 2 members of his disciplinary committee were there as well, their authority meaningless in the face of Armageddon. Former enemies were now just fellow survivors. As they stumbled inside, a figure emerged from the shadows of a collapsing bookshelf. It was Mr. Kageyama. He was pale, his glasses askew, but his eyes burned with a new, desperate fire. "Uzumaki," he called out, running to them. "You have to listen to me. I was their agent, the council's." Quote. Kurumu snarled, stepping in front of Naruto protectively. There's no time," Kageyama pleaded, holding up his communication scroll, which now glowed with a frantic, pulsating red light. "This isn't a random barrage. The spears are being channeled by 3 orbital amplification arrays. They are ancient, powerful artifacts. But they have a weakness. EY draw ambient magical energy from the island to power the quarantine field. If you can overload one of them with a massive, focused burst of pure power, you might be able to trigger a feedback loop and shatter the entire network." He looked directly at Naruto, then at the silver-haired Moka standing beside him. "Your power, that raw, red energy. And her power, the pure, ancient aura of a vampire lord. Separately, they might not be enough. But together you might have a chance." Inner Moka's crimson eyes narrowed, studying the terrified, traitorous teacher. She saw the truth in his desperation. Naruto looked around the library, at the faces of the students, at Jin, at Kuyo, at his friends. They were all looking to him. He was no longer just a student, no longer an anomaly. He was their only hope. He met Inner Moka's gaze, a silent question passing between them. She gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. They were a partnership born of crisis, an alliance of two impossible powers. "All right," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the fear-filled room, ringing with a newfound authority. "We're not going to hide in a basement and wait to be erased. We're going to fight back." Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Impossible Alliance. The echoes of Naruto's declaration, "We're going to fight back," hung in the dust-filled air of the ruined library. For a moment, there was only the sound of a distant, silent impact and the terrified breathing of 24 survivors. Hope was a fragile, unfamiliar thing in the face of an indifferent apocalypse. It was Kuyo who broke the spell, his voice a harsh rasp of pragmatism. "Fight that." He gestured wildly at the doorway, where the sky pulsed with a golden, world-ending light. "With what, Uzumaki? That is holy fire. It unmakes us. We are yokai, creatures of shadow and spirit. That is our antithesis. Our only alternative," a calm voice cut in, "is to sit here and be unmade." Jin Ichija stepped forward, wiping a smear of soot from his cheek. He looked from Kuyo's desperate face to Naruto's resolute one. Uzumaki's plan, however insane, is the only one on the table. The Ichija clan did not survive for 1,000 years by surrendering to the inevitable. He gave Naruto a sharp, appraising look. "You have my fire." The unexpected endorsement from the school's highest noble galvanized the room. If Jin Ichija was siding with the nameless outcast, then this was no longer about power or status. It was about survival. "The Northern Cliff Shrine," Kageyama said, spreading a dusty, magically illuminated map of the island on a table. His finger tapped a glowing rune at the island's highest point. "It's the Academy's primary nexus of spiritual energy. The Council is using it as an anchor point for their central array. It's the system's heart." He looked up, his expression grim. "It will be the most heavily defended point on the island, and you will be completely exposed. But it is the only place a direct strike has any chance of overloading the network." Inner Moka stepped forward, her crimson eyes scanning the map with the cool detachment of a general. "Defenses. The Council does not rely solely on orbital bombardment," Kageyama explained, his voice tight with remembered fear. "They will have deployed guardians. They are constructs, beings of pure, solidified holy energy. They are anathema to yokai. A single 2UCH from their weapons can unravel a lesser monster's form. So, faceless angels with swords of insta-death." "Got it," Kurumu muttered, a grimace on her face. She unfurled her wings. "I can scout ahead. Tell you where they are before they see us." "Kuyo, Jin," Naruto said, his voice taking on a natural command that no one thought to question. "Your fire. We'll need it for crowd control. Keep the guardians off the main group." "Sukune." "Kageyama," Naruto continued. "Stay in the center. Protect Kageyama. He's our guide." He then turned to Moka, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. The trust that passed between them was a tangible thing, a silent pact. "You and I are the main cannon. We save our strength for the final shot." Inner Moka gave a sharp, confident smirk. "Try to keep up." They moved out, a small, desperate army charging into the heart of their own execution. The campus was a surreal hellscape. Craters of cauterized earth smoked silently, and the golden dome of the quarantine field cast an eerie, divine light over the destruction. The relentless, silent rain of light spears continued, forcing them to sprint from the cover of one ruined building to another. Kurumu was their eyes, a blur of blue and black in the unnatural twilight. 3 of them. By the science building. They look like they're made of glass and light. She'd yell from above, and the group would change course, melting into the shadows. Their first direct confrontation came in the open space of the athletic fields. A dozen of the guardians materialized from thin air, their forms vaguely humanoid but featureless. Their wings not of feather but of shimmering, geometric light. They moved with an unnerving, silent grace, their swords of golden energy held at the ready. "Now!" Naruto yelled. Kuyo and Jin moved to the front. A study in contrasts. Kuyo's rage manifested as a wild, roaring torrent of orange flame, forming a defensive wall that the guardians recoiled from. Jin, on the other hand, was all precision. His silver fox fire lashed out like whips, not trying to immolate the guardians, but to disarm them, to bind their legs, to control the battlefield. A guardian broke through the line, its sword descending on Sukune. Before anyone could react, Kurumu dive-bombed it, not with an attack, but with a full-body tackle, using her momentum to send the light construct stumbling into the path of Kuyo's firewall, where it dissolved with a faint, musical chime. They pushed forward, a frantic, fighting retreat toward their goal. They were not winning. They were surviving, buoying every foot of ground with fire and fury. Naruto and Moka remained in the eye of the storm, their energy conserved, their focus absolute. He could feel the immense, calm ocean of her power next to him, and she could feel the raging, chaotic volcano of the nine tails sealed within him. They were two opposite ends of a spectrum, and they were about to be aimed at the same target. They finally reached the base of the northern cliff. The ancient stone steps of the shrine were shattered, but the path was clear. At the top, silhouetted against the hateful golden sky, the air itself seemed to warp and shimmer. They had reached the nexus. Guarding the final ascent was a different class of enemy. It was twice the size of the others, its form more defined, wielding a massive, two-handed greatsword of light. A prime guardian. This one is mine, Jin said, his voice tight. Kuyo stepped up beside him, his face set in a grim mask of determination. Ours, the former disciplinary chairman corrected. Go, Jin yelled at Naruto. We will buy you your chance. The two kitsune charged, a clashing storm of orange and silver fire, engaging the prime guardian in a battle that shook the very cliffs. Naruto didn't waste the opportunity. He, Moka, and the others scrambled up the final path. They stood on the flat, windswept peak. The shrine was a simple, ancient stone torii gate, and in its center, the energy was so thick it was visible. A column of invisible force connecting the earth to the sky. This is it, Kageyama shouted over the wind. You have to strike the exact center of the nexus. It's the only way to force the feedback loop. More of the lesser guardians were beginning to coalesce on the clifftop. Kurumu flew in circles, dropping yokai caltrops that flared with dark energy, briefly disrupting their forms. Naruto turned to Moka. The world fell away. There was only the roar of the wind, the hum of the nexus, and the unwavering certainty in her crimson eyes. Are you ready? She asked, her voice a calm anchor in the chaos. This will take everything we have. I trust you, he said, and the simple words were the truest thing he had ever known. He held out his scarred right hand, palm up. Follow my lead. She placed her hand over his. The contact was electric. He closed his eyes, reaching down, not into the shallow well of his own chakra, but deeper, into the roaring furnace of the cage. He didn't ask, he took. The vermilion energy of the nine tails erupted, not as a cloak, but flowing into his hand, raw and untamed. Moka, in turn, drew upon her own power. Her vampiric aura, a force of pure, ancient dominance, surged forth, a tide of deep, blood-red energy, shot through with ethereal silver. It was disciplined, controlled, a perfect counterpoint to his chaotic rage. Their powers met in the space between their hands. It was not a gentle merging. It was a violent, screaming fusion. His chaotic, spinning energy was the engine, her vast, cold power was the fuel and the focusing lens. A sphere of energy began to form, a churning vortex of blackish red so dark it seemed to drink the light, shot through with silver cracks of Moka's aura. It spun with the furious, omnidirectional power of a Rasengan, but it was imbued with the soul-crushing weight of a vampire lord. It was a lance forged from night and rage. Now, Moka yelled, her voice in perfect sync with his own silent roar. Together, they thrust their hands forward. The spiraling lance of darkness shot out. It did not hiss or roar. It moved in absolute silence, a sliver of pure non-existence that ripped through the air. It struck the heart of the nexus, the invisible column of energy connecting earth and sky. For a single, eternal moment, there was no sound. Then, a noise like the universe cracking in half. A high-pitched, keening shriek erupted from the sky. High above, at the apex of the golden dome, a spiderweb of black cracks appeared, centered on the point their attack had struck. The feedback loop was happening. The council's own power, amplified and corrupted by the yokai energy it was meant to cleanse, was now tearing their weapon apart from the inside. The golden dome flickered. The rain of light spears ceased. The guardians on the cliffside wavered, their forms dissolving like smoke. Below, the prime guardian, about to deliver a final blow to a flagging Jin and Kuyo, simply crumbled into dust. With a final, deafening shatter, the sky broke. The quarantine field disintegrated into a trillion motes of fading golden dust, revealing the true, dark, star-filled night above. It was over. On the clifftop, Naruto and Moka collapsed to their knees, the expenditure of power leaving them utterly, bone-deeply drained. The chaotic red chakra receded, and Moka's silver hair flickered, threatening to revert to pink from sheer exhaustion. They had won. A bruised and battered Jin and Kuyo staggered up the path, staring at the clear night sky, then at the two figures kneeling at the shrine. The impossible had happened. The lambs had slaughtered the butcher. Silence returned to the ruined island. The hum was gone. The fear was gone. All that remained was the wind, the rubble, and the exhausted survivors of a war they had never asked for. Kageyama stared at his communication scroll, which had gone dead the moment the field collapsed. A single, final message was burned onto its surface. A message not from the council, but from a system alert. Annihilation protocol failure. Quarantine breach detected. Signal origin. Yokai Academy. Status. Hostile. He looked at the small group of exhausted students who had just defied a godlike power. They had survived the cleansing. They had broken the quarantine. They know, he whispered to the wind, his voice filled with a new and different kind of dread. They know we survived. The war was not over. It had just begun. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A Sky of Scars. Dawn broke over a landscape of scars. The rising sun painted the sky in gentle hues of pink and orange. A cruel and beautiful irony against the backdrop of a world systematically unmade. Yokai Academy was a ruin, a ghost of itself. Smoking craters and cauterized pockmarked the grounds where dormitories and classrooms had once stood. The silence was the most unsettling part. It was the silence of a graveyard, a profound and heavy quiet that had swallowed the screams of the night before. On the northern cliff, the impossible alliance kept a weary vigil. Naruto and Inner Moka sat back to back, a silent island of shared exhaustion. The immense power they had unleashed had left them drained to their very marrow, but in that shared emptiness, a new kind of bond had been forged. It was a wordless understanding, a respect that transcended friendship or alliance. It was the bond of soldiers who had survived an unwinnable war together. Kurumu tended to the wounded, her usual dramatic flair replaced by a quiet, fierce efficiency. Jin and Kuyo, former rivals, worked together to create a makeshift shelter from the stones of the ruined shrine, their animosity burned away in the crucible of the previous night. Sukune, the human boy who should have been the first to break, was a surprising pillar of strength, his calm voice reassuring the younger students who had huddled behind them. And Kageyama, the traitor who had become their salvation, stared out at the horizon. His face a mask of grim calculation. They will not let this stand, he said, his voice cutting through the morning stillness. The council's authority is absolute because their power has always been absolute. We have proven them fallible. They cannot allow a single survivor to carry that story into the wider world. So they'll be back, Naruto said. It wasn't a question. He felt the truth of it in his bones. He pushed himself to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest. The scar on his palm ached with a phantom energy. This time, they won't use a cleansing protocol. They'll send their hunters, their elite. They'll come to finish the job personally. Inner Moka rose beside him, her movements still possessing an ethereal grace despite her fatigue. They will be arrogant, she stated, her crimson eyes fixed on the horizon. They will believe our victory was a fluke, a one-in-a-million shot born of desperation. They will underestimate us. That will be our only advantage. An advantage we need to be ready to use, Jin added, approaching them. He gave a slight, formal bow, no longer laced with irony or condescension, but with genuine respect. The name Ichija carries some weight beyond this island. My family has contacts, resources. If we can get a message out, we might be able to rally others who have chafed under the council's silent rule. It was a staggering offer. He was proposing treason against the established order of the world, betting his entire lineage on the strength of the boy he had once tried to isolate. As the sun climbed higher, the survivors began to take stock. They found other pockets of students who had weathered the storm, hidden in basements and shielded caves. The academy's population had been decimated, but they were not alone. A grim, silent community of the damned began to form in the ruins of the main school building. Naruto, Moka, Kurumu, and their circle became the de facto leaders. There was no vote, no declaration. Leadership had been forged in the fire, and their authority was now unquestioned. They spent the day organizing, rationing what little food and medical supplies could be salvaged, and setting up watches. The atmosphere was thick with grief, but it was not despair. It was the grim, hardened resolve of a people who had looked into the abyss and spat in its eye. That evening, Naruto found Moka standing alone at the edge of the Crimson Lake, which now reflected a sky scarred by the memory of holy fire. The rosary was back around her neck, her hair a soft pink, but the quiet strength in her green EY's was a permanent echo of her other self. "She's quiet," Moka said softly, touching the silver cross. "The fight took more out of her than I've ever felt before. It's like she's sleeping. We all need to rest," Naruto replied. Standing beside her, he looked at their reflections in the water. A boy with no past and a girl with two souls, standing on the ashes of their world. "Moka, when I was fighting, when we joined our powers, I saw something. In my head, more echoes. A burning village, my village. A man and a woman, my parents. They were protecting me. They sealed the monster inside me, to save everyone." He turned to her, his blue eyes raw with a pain that was centuries old and a day new. "My entire life, the one I can't remember, was built on a sacrifice. I was never just a cage. I was a vault, meant to protect something precious, even if it was also something terrible." Moka's eyes filled with tears. She didn't offer platitudes or condolences. She simply reached out and took his hand, his scarred right hand, and squeezed it. Her warmth was an anchor, a statement that his past, no matter how terrible, did not define his present. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Kurumu, who landed beside them with a soft flutter of her wings. Her face was grim. "They're here," she said, her voice low. Kageyama's long-range sensors picked it up. "One ship, not military, small, a diplomatic vessel, he thinks. It just entered the island's airspace." They gathered at the edge of the ruined campus, watching as a sleek, silver craft descended from the clouds. It was not a warship. It was an envoy's ship, elegant and unarmed. It landed silently in the center of what used to be the main courtyard. A ramp lowered, and a single figure emerged. It was a woman, impossibly ancient and ethereally beautiful, dressed in the pristine white and gold robes of a council high elder. She had long, silver hair that seemed to absorb the light and eyes the color of a winter sky. She radiated an aura of power that was not violent or oppressive like the quarantine field, but was 1,000 times more terrifying. It was the calm, absolute power of a fundamental law of nature. It was the power of a being who did not need to raise her voice to command the world. She glided across the rubble, her feet not touching the ground, and stopped before the assembled survivors. Her cold, ancient eyes swept over them, her gaze lingering on Jin, then Kuyo, then Kurumu, then Moka. Finally, her eyes settled on Naruto. There was no anger in her expression, no hatred. There was only a profound, soul-chilling disappointment. The look a gardener might give a prized flower that had inexplicably sprouted thorns. "Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice the sound of bells chiming in a winter frost. It was a sound of absolute authority. "The vessel of the nine-tailed demon fox. A power we, the council, sealed away in your bloodline for the good of all. A trust you have now broken." She raised a single, delicate hand. The annihilation protocol was a regrettable necessity. A crude tool for a delicate problem. It failed, so I have come to correct that failure personally. This wasn't a hunter. This wasn't an army. This was a god, come to personally erase a clerical error from the pages of her creation. But Naruto did not flinch. He had faced the sky falling. He had faced his own monstrous nature. He would not be cowed by a self-proclaimed deity. He stepped forward, Moka and Kurumu immediately moving to flank him, their stance is a silent, unbreakable declaration. "This island is under our protection now," Naruto said, his voice clear and steady. "You destroyed our school. You killed our friends. We will not let you take anything else." The elder's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise in their depths. "You speak of protection. You, who hold the seed of this world's destruction within your very soul. You are a child playing with a nuclear bomb, unaware that your games threaten to set the world on fire." She looked at Moka, then back at Naruto. A slow, cruel smile touched her lips. "You have made allies. You have forged bonds. You believe this makes you strong." She shook her head, a gesture of profound pity. "It only gives you more to lose." She raised her hand again, and this time, the world behind her seemed to warp. A wave of invisible, crushing pressure washed over them. A force of pure will that made the air thick as syrup and the ground groan. But as the pressure hit Naruto, it met another force. He didn't erupt in red chakra. Instead, he stood his ground, and deep within him, the beast in the cage opened its eyes. A voice that was not his own, a deep, rumbling growl that echoed with the rage of ages, spoke in the back of his mind. "Less than so, the old crows have finally left their perch." Greater than, it snarled. "Less than, let them come, boy. Let's show this God what true power looks like." Greater than. Naruto felt a surge of raw, untamed power, not forced, but offered. An alliance. He looked at Moka, at the rosary at her throat, a symbol of a sealed power. He looked at Kurumu, her wings spread, ready to fight a god for her friends. He was a Jinchuriki. He was a cage. He was a vault. But he was also a friend, a leader, and a protector. He was Naruto Uzumaki. And his story, the one he was writing himself, was just beginning. He met the elder's gaze, his own blue eyes blazing with a fire that was all his own. And for the first time in his forgotten life, he felt truly, completely whole. The war for his world had come to his doorstep, and he was ready. Chapter 10 End.